The Music Loving Bears by Juaquin Miller. Now, the first thing you need to know is that bears love music. That's right. You see, bears love music almost as much as bears love honey, which is to say that bears love music, well, about as much as they love their own lives. Now, some of you are probably thinking, that could be true. And most of you are out there thinking that storyteller out there, he's talking through his hat. But I know for a fact, bears, they love music. You see, one day my daddy and I and our hired hand, Mr. Light Howard, we were making our way to the mill with a wagon loaded with sacks of wheat that we had winnowed with a flail and a wagon cover. And we were making our way to the mill, but that was 2 days' ride, and so we camped for the night on the banks of the Calapooya River. And I unhitched the team, and I pastured them, and I watered them, and my daddy made a little crackling pine log fire. And then old Light Howard, he got out his fiddle and he commenced to play. Tunes like Money Musk and Zip Coon and Old Dan Tucker. The kind of music that once kept the feet of hunters and trappers dancing on the barroom floors from the Hudson Bay clean out to the Oregon Territory. And the sweet strains of Light's music, they just drifted up and up through the dark fir boughs toward the spikes of the stars, which seemed to have come a little lower that night, just to hear the sweet strains of Light's music. But that's when my daddy's hand drifted out in the direction of his Kentucky long rifle, and I knew there was going to be trouble. You see, my daddy, he was like a mountain man. He could feel things before they happened, and quicker than you could spit. He had that long rifle up and shouldered and pointed out into them dark woods. And I jumped up to see what it was. And there was a huge sow black bear coming right towards our camp. Another one behind it, and another one behind that one. And my daddy had that gun trained right on that lead bear. And Light Howard over there, Light Howard had not heard anything other than the sweet strains of his own music until my daddy tossed a stick into that fire. And when the sparks flew, Light Howard, he knew, and he forsook that fiddle of his for his long rifle. And now both those men had them guns pointed out into them inky dark woods as those three bears, they come closer and closer and closer. And then they stopped. And those three bears, they just sat down on their haunches. But those men kept the guns trained right on those bears because you never know what a black bear is going to do. But after a while, those bears not seeming to pose any particular danger, and a Kentucky long rifle being a heavy, cumbersome implement, and Light Howard being more of a fiddle player than a rifleman, well, the weight of that argument, it convinced him to forsake that rifle for his fiddle. And right in front of those three huge bears, Light Howard, he just commenced to play. On and on and on he fiddled, sweeter than I've ever heard him play. And after a while, one of those bears was just kind of nodding his head as if to the rhythm of the music. Another one had his big pink tongue just stuck out, as if to taste the sweet strains of Light Howard's melodies. And that other bear, well, he was sort of tapping his paw just ever so lightly. And my daddy whispered, Light, if you could really play, they'd be dancing by now. But Light Howard, he just played and played and played like I'd never heard him play before. I swear he fiddled that milky white moon up higher into the sky that night. And these three bears and these three men, we just sat together, enveloped by the beauty of that music. But in time, old Light Howard, well, he could fiddle no longer. And finally, his chin had sunk down to his chest, and he fell asleep, and the music stopped. Well, when it did, those bears, they got up, and then they dropped down onto all fours, and they drifted off into those inky, dark woods. But that night, my daddy and I and Light Howard, we slept around that little fire. And that night, the oxen come up real close around us. And the spumes of their hot breath, it descended upon us just like so much incense. Now, some of you are probably out there thinking, that could be true. And a lot of you are probably thinking that's storyteller. He's just talking through his hat. But I know for a fact, bears, they love music. The music Lovin' Bears by Oregon's original poet laureate, Juaquin Miller.